Hello friends, Marshall Brown here, Ask the Rev Wednesdays. Glad to see you. This is where you ask questions and I do my best to answer them. And last week we began this discussion about how to identify our over-desires so that we might change. The goal is change, growth in the love of God, the gospel of God. And how do we change? And one of you asked me a couple weeks ago, how do I identify my over-desires that we talked about 2 weeks ago in the sermon and a little bit this past week. Now, just as a little reminder, refresher, I'm back with my whiteboard. I love my whiteboard. This is an image of a iceberg, okay? And you may know that an iceberg, a third of it is above the water, but 2/3 are below. And in this illustration, what we do, our overt sins, is the third that is above the water, but what is below the water is what we got to deal with if we really want to change. And to extend the metaphor just a little bit, or to clarify it, I should say, I'm putting what we do, what we believe, and what we love. What we do is above the water. At some level, believe is the water line. That's not so important to where it is in the image. But what matters most is what's 2/3 below the surface, what we love, the dispositions of our heart. One author has said it this way: what the heart desires, the mind justifies and the will chooses. So what we love is going to determine what we do. So if we want to change, we can't just deal at the level of what we do and just say, stop it. That just, how well does that work? Not very, okay? You got to deal with what we love. Okay. More broadly, that we said the path to change is identifying our over desires, strangling them, starving them. We'll talk about them at some point. But then a little bit we talked about this week, beholding God's love, beholding a greater love, a greater desire, which is God's love for us in Christ. Now, last week I used, when talking about this, changing by identifying these things, I talked about the importance of godly friends, of helping us to see our over desires, because we don't see it. I mean, the question that came to me 2 weeks ago is, how do I identify, how do I know what my over desires are? I don't know what they are. Great self-observation, because we don't. Friends are a great way, but also our emotions, okay? And last week I used a marital example to talk about this. This week, quite personally, I want to talk about parenting, because I don't know if you struggle with this. Maybe you're a better parent than me. But one of the tools in my parenting toolbox is to shame my son. If I want him to do something, I shame him. And it happened actually not too long ago, and I was just so grieved. Why did I do that? Why did I shame him? I mean, there's some parenting tool things that I might need, but there's also something underlying in it. And last week we looked at the emotions. Let's use the emotions to help us a little this week. Okay, we talked about shag, slag, using these things to help us identify what's beneath: shame, hurt, anger, gladness, sadness, loneliness, fear, afraid, and guilt. Now, for my purposes, when I shame my son to try to get him to do something, which I know is wrong and is not good parenting, it's not following Jesus' love or any kind of good parenting book. Shame is just not good, right? One thing I did tell my friends. I told Nick, Pastor Nick, we talked about it, and I also told my accountability cohort. I was like, you guys got to help me with this. I don't want to be a shaming parent. But then also, as I in my own heart, what is it? I want something, the shame that I am heaping on my son is because of a shame in me. People who shame generally have shame in themselves. And for me, the underlying disposition is a desire to be adequate, and for my son to be adequate, to measure up. And so when I'm shaming him, that's what's happening in my heart. If I'm angry at him because he's not doing what I want, so I'm shaming him to get him to do what I want, that's about control. Those are the underlying issues. And so we use this, but I had to think about it. I had to take some time. I had to talk to people, but then think about it. What is it in my heart that is causing me to try to control my son and get him to do something I want him to do by shaming him? And it's painful. I mean, I'm talking to you but this is actually painful, right? To recognize this about yourself. But I have to know what's beneath that. Because if I want to stop shaming, if I want to not be that parent, what is it that I love? That I want, his control, but maybe even looking good to you or others in my own eyes because of the behavior of my son. What is it that I love that's causing me to do this? And the way to identify that, a couple of the ways, are with our friends and our emotions. So anyway, that's a quite personal example, but real in ways that we're trying to change by identifying what it is we love, identifying those over desires so we can strangle them and ultimately behold the love of God who doesn't love us in shame but moves towards us. So we'll talk more about a couple other examples in weeks to come, but that is Grace for Today. Actually, that's Ask the Rev Wednesdays, not Grace for Today. That was a while back. Thanks.